Hi, my name is Joseph Morocha. I was the electrical supervisor in the maintenance department at Palos Community Hospital. Ken Lash was the manager of clinical engineering and was my direct supervisor. So here's the story as I see it. In the maintenance department, someone in supervision in each group was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the event there was an emergency, someone could be contacted. In the maintenance shop, Jeff the manager and Pat the supervisor alternated on-call coverage. And in the power plant, Greg the manager and Ray the supervisor, they alternated on-call coverage. Although Ken Lash was the manager of the electric shop, he wouldn't alternate on-call coverage with me, even though I was the supervisor working underneath him. For nearly the entire first 3 years as supervisor of the electric shop, I was on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Ken Lash would not alternate the on-call duty with me, even if I was on vacation or needed for someone to fill in for me. I didn't go anywhere on vacation. I took vacation time off a day or two at a time, but I carried the on-call pager on the few days I did take off and was on call while on vacation. I was salaried. Didn't bother me to be on call. It was just part of the job. I carried the on-call pager always. During the winter months, the maintenance department pays on-call pay to hourly employees to be on snow duty. They carry a pager and receive a small hourly stipend to be available. In the previous video, I mentioned I had to take a week off for oral surgery. Because I would be off for at least a week, Ken Lash told me to ask the electricians under me if one of them would carry the on-call pager during my absence. Now, the electricians are familiar with the snow duty on-call pay and said if they would be required to limit their after normal working hour plans, they wanted on-call pay because they are hourly employees. I told Ken Lash the electrician said if they are on call carrying the on-call pager, they wanted on-call pay. Ken Lash told me he was not going to authorize on-call pay, but told me to cut a deal with the electricians to be on call without on-call pay and offered to alter their time cards, adding hours to their time as if they worked to coerce them into being on call and carrying the pager. I told Ken Lash I was uncomfortable with entering time for hours not really worked. Ken Lash told me he routinely does it for his men, and if I didn't want to add hours for time not worked, that he would do it. Now, to me, falsifying time, adding hours to pay an employee for hours not worked, is not only a violation of policy, it's simply the wrong thing to do. I believe it's stealing pay from the company. Ken Lash was trying to coerce me into doing something I knew was wrong. The deal is cut, and John Ulrich agrees to carry the pager for the week I took off for surgery, and Ken Lash promised to falsify John Ulrich's time, adding time for hours not worked, to compensate John for carrying the on-call pager. Ken Lash is the manager. He's the one that's going to be falsifying the hours for hours not worked, not me. It's wrong. It's just not right. But he's the boss. It gets worse. 6 months later, I plan a week's vacation, the first real vacation I'm taking in almost 4 years. Again, the issue of someone having to be on call and carry the on-call pager. Ken Lash won't do the on-call duty, even though he is salaried and my manager. All the other managers alternate the on-call duty. Over a week prior to going on vacation, I talked to the electricians and asked for one of them to volunteer to be on call and carry the on-call pager, as Ken told me, and they say they want it to be paid on call. I talk to Ken, and I tell him the electricians want on-call pay if they carry the pager. Ken Lash tells me to assign one of the electricians to be on call and tell them that Ken Lash will change their time and add hours for hours not worked to compensate them for being on call and carrying the pager. Ken Lash, again, is promising to falsify time, which I won't do. It's wrong. And I still see it as stealing from the hospital. Now, the electricians tell me they want on-call pay, that Ken Lash didn't keep his word to add time to John Ulrich's pay to compensate him for carrying the pager the last time he made the deal. So I go back to Ken and I tell him the electricians wanted on-call pay. Nobody would take his offer to add hours to their time because Ken Lash didn't add the hours to John's pay the last time as Ken Lash promised. Ken Lash told me he forgot to add the hours to John's time. Ken Lash directs me to assign an electrician to be on call, give them the pager to carry. He was the boss. That was the end of the discussion. It gets worse and worse. I come back from vacation. Ken Lash is angry. He said 2 of the electricians went to Human Resources over the on-call issue, and as a result, Ken Lash ended up taking the on-call pager while I was on vacation. Every other manager in the department would alternate with their supervisor. Ken Lash was the manager. I was his supervisor. What was such a big deal of carrying the on-call pager? In the electrical shop, the odds of even getting a call are slim. The electrical shop would go for months without a call. And even if you did get a call, you would go through the list of electricians, call them at home, tell them there was an electrical problem, and they would go to the hospital and fix it. Even if Ken Lash was on call, he wouldn't have had to do anything more than pick up the phone and call an electrician. What's the big deal over being on call? It gets worse and worse and worse. Ken Lash gives me a disciplinary letter, which is the step 2 of the progressive disciplinary policy, for failing to give ample notice to the electricians that they would be on call. Over a week prior to my vacation, I told Ken Lash there was a problem. The electricians wanted all on-call pay. Ken Lash tried to coerce people into a scheme of falsifying time, then ignored the problem and directed me to just assign someone to be on call. This is nuts. I did exactly what Ken Lash told me to do. Ken Lash attempted to coerce me into falsifying time, and I get disciplined. I see Ken Lash's disciplining me as retaliatory over his being inconvenienced and having to carry the on-call pager, which I believe was his job in the first place. Now let's look at the bigger picture. Ken Lash told me he routinely adds hours for work for the employees of clinical engineering department to carry the pager form for hours not worked. If for over 20 years Ken Lash did falsify time, how much hospital money did Ken Lash pay out? So you, the viewer, decide, does Ken Lash's actions show him as a credible person?